I went to the clinic on a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles, the kind of morning that feels ordinary enough to disappear from memory. The sun was already bright, traffic already impatient, and I kept telling myself this was just a routine checkup. Nothing dramatic, nothing to worry about. I'd done this 100 times before. Still, my palms were slightly damp on the steering wheel, and my chest felt tight in that familiar way I never admitted to anyone. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and cheap coffee. A muted TV played a morning show no one was watching. I checked in, sat down, and scrolled through my phone, pretending I wasn't nervous. That's when I heard my name. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room cleanly. Warm, calm. I looked up, and for half a second my brain stalled. He was standing a few feet away, clipboard in hand, wearing scrubs that somehow made him look both professional and effortlessly attractive. Mid-20s, maybe, dark hair, kind eyes, and a smile that didn't feel forced the way customer service smiles usually do. When our eyes met, he didn't look away immediately. Neither did I. It was brief, but it lingered just a little too long to be accidental. "Follow me," he said gently. I stood up, suddenly very aware of my body, my posture, the sound of my footsteps behind him. As we walked down the hallway, he made a light joke about the weather, about how LA couldn't decide if it wanted to be summer or spring. I laughed, probably louder than necessary, grateful for the excuse to release some tension. Inside the exam room, he introduced himself and explained everything he was going to do before doing it. His tone was careful, respectful. When he wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, his fingers brushed my skin, and I felt a quiet jolt travel through me. I told myself I was imagining things. Clinics weren't places where stories like this began. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my slightly elevated heart rate on the monitor. "Yeah," I said quickly, then smiled. "Guess I'm just not a fan of doctors' offices." He smiled back, softer this time. "Most people aren't." As he took my vitals, he didn't rush. He asked questions that felt genuine, not scripted. How was work? Had I been sleeping well? When I mentioned stress, his expression shifted just a little, like he understood more than he was letting on. Before I left, he told me the doctor would be in shortly, but he lingered by the door for a moment longer than necessary. Another glance, another shared smile. Then he was gone. I told myself to forget about it. And yet, when I came back for follow-up tests a week later, I caught myself hoping he'd be the one to call my name again. He was. This time, the familiarity was undeniable. A small grin when he saw me. A quiet, "Good to see you again." The jokes came easier. The silences didn't feel awkward. When he adjusted the stethoscope, his touch was gentle in a way that felt personal, even though I knew it wasn't supposed to be. Over the next few visits, a rhythm formed. We talked more. About movies. About music. About how hard it was to find real connection in a city full of people. He never crossed a line, not officially, but there was something unspoken humming between us, something that made the sterile white room feel warmer when he was in it. On my last visit, as he handed me a printout and explained next steps, he hesitated. "If you have any questions," he said, then paused. "I mean, anything at all, you can text me." He wrote his number on the paper, right below the clinic's logo. Professional enough to be deniable. Personal enough to mean everything. I waited until I got to my car before I smiled. Our first meeting outside the clinic was supposed to be coffee. Just coffee. Public place. Safe. We sat across from each other in a small cafe near the beach, sunlight spilling through the windows, and talked for hours. Coffee turned into a walk. The walk turned into dinner plans. Dinner turned into sitting in my car at midnight, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. That night, he told me about growing up feeling invisible, about working his way through school, about loneliness that didn't go away even when surrounded by people. I listened, really listened, and shared parts of myself I usually kept buried. My fears, my past relationships, the exhaustion of always being strong. When he looked at me, it wasn't with judgment or curiosity. It was recognition. For the first time in years, I felt seen. As weeks passed, our conversations stretched into late nights. Texts became calls. Calls became something I looked forward to more than anything else in my day. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, something real could come from the most unexpected place. I thought I'd found love in the most unexpected place. I didn't know I was walking toward betrayal. What started between us stopped feeling accidental the night he reached for my hand without asking. We were sitting in his car after dinner, the city lights blurring past the windshield, and his fingers found mine like they'd always belonged there. No grand confession, no dramatic pause, just a quiet understanding settling between us. From that night on, we stopped pretending we were anything other than together. Dating him felt easy in a way I wasn't used to. On weekends, we drove up the coast with the windows down, salty air filling the car, music low enough for conversation. We'd pull over just to watch the waves crash against the rocks, our shoulders touching, his head leaning briefly against mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Those moments felt stolen and precious, like secrets the ocean was keeping for us. His apartment became my favorite place to be. It wasn't fancy, but it felt warm. We spent quiet nights there, cooking simple meals, sitting on the floor when we were too tired to clean up. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just existed in the same space, legs tangled, the TV playing something neither of us was really watching. In the dark, he whispered things he said he'd never told anyone, that he felt safe with me, that I made him feel less alone. I believed every word. I wanted him to be part of my real life, not just the beautiful bubble we'd created, so I introduced him to my childhood best friend. We'd grown up together, survived everything together. He knew my history, my scars, the parts of me I didn't have to explain. Bringing them into the same room felt like merging two halves of my world. At first, it was perfect. They got along easily, laughing at old stories, teasing me the way only someone who'd known me forever could. I felt proud, like I'd finally built something solid. Like my life was finally aligning in a way that made sense. It didn't change all at once. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't announce itself. The first favor seemed harmless. He was short on money 1 month, just until his next paycheck. He looked embarrassed even asking, and I hated that he felt that way. I sent it without thinking. He thanked me over and over, promised he'd pay me back. He didn't, but I told myself it didn't matter. Then there was paperwork he didn't understand. Forms, emails, things he said stressed him out. I sat with him for hours, helping, reassuring, taking on the weight of his anxiety as if it were my own. When he had bad days, really bad days, I became his anchor. I canceled plans. I stayed up late. I told myself this was what love looked like. Showing up, sacrificing. Sometimes, late at night, a small voice inside me would ask why it always felt like I was giving more. I pushed it down. Love requires patience, I told myself. Love requires understanding. He started pulling away in subtle ways. Replies took longer. Calls were shorter. When I asked if something was wrong, he blamed work stress, family issues, being overwhelmed. I believed him because I wanted to, because the idea that something was breaking between us felt unbearable. I noticed changes in the way he interacted with my best friend too. A little too comfortable. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. They texted more often, but when I asked about it, he brushed it off. Said they were just talking about me. About plans. About surprises. I laughed it off, embarrassed for even questioning it. But there were moments that stuck with me. Times I walked into a room and the laughter stopped abruptly. Times they both looked at their phones when I sat down, like they'd been caught doing something wrong. Once, I saw his name flash across my friend's screen late at night. When I asked, my friend shrugged it off. Nothing important. I wanted to believe them. God, I wanted to believe them. I started noticing how easily he could shift between affection and distance. One day he'd hold me like I was the only thing grounding him. The next he felt miles away, eyes elsewhere, mind somewhere I couldn't reach. When I tried to talk about it, he'd sigh, say I was overthinking, say he needed support, not pressure. So I tried harder. I gave more time, more understanding, more of myself. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that all relationships went through this, that the sweetness would come back if I just held on long enough. The coast drives became less frequent. The quiet nights felt heavier, filled with unspoken things. Even his whispered promises started sounding rehearsed, like lines he'd memorized instead of feelings he meant. Still, I stayed, because I was in love, because I trusted him, because I trusted my friend. Suspicion hovered in the background, never fully forming into something I could confront. There was no proof, just feelings I didn't want to name, just patterns I pretended not to see. Looking back, I realize how carefully it was all done, how slowly my boundaries were moved, how gently my trust was dismantled piece by piece. At the time, all I knew was that I was holding on to two people I loved, unaware they were already slipping away together. I trusted two people with my life, and neither of them planned to protect my heart. I didn't find out because someone confessed. I didn't find out because my instincts finally screamed loud enough. I found out because of an accident so small it almost felt cruel in its simplicity. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. That wasn't unusual. We'd reached that level of comfort where privacy blurred into trust. The screen lit up with a notification while I was rinsing a glass in the sink. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear I wasn't. But I glanced over out of habit, expecting to see my name. It wasn't. It was my childhood best friend's name. The message preview was short. Too short. Just a heart emoji and a line that made my stomach drop so fast I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always is, right? Friends joke. Friends flirt harmlessly. Friends don't mean anything by it. Still, my hands were shaking when I picked up the phone. One unlocked screen turned into 1,000 cuts. There were messages going back months. Not casual. Not harmless. Intimate. Strategic. Calculated. Jokes about me. Plans involving me. Conversations about money I didn't know they were having together. Screenshots of my bank transfers, my help, my generosity, shared like trophies. Then the photos. Pictures of them together when I thought he was working late. Smiles that looked too easy, too practiced. A selfie taken in my car when I was out of town. My chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and discarded. I scrolled until my vision blurred. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. He'd been using me for financial stability, for emotional security, for convenience. And my best friend, the person who knew my fears, my history, my softest wounds, had been there the entire time, encouraging it, benefiting from it, sharing in it. They were planning to leave together. Another city, another life, with what I had helped build. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming like nothing in the world was wrong, I was sitting at the table with his phone in my hands. He stopped cold. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence felt violent. How long? My voice sounded unfamiliar, stripped of warmth. He didn't try to lie. That hurt more than any excuse could have. Before he could answer, my phone buzzed. My best friend was calling. I put it on speaker. There was no drama in their voices. No panic. Just resignation. They didn't deny it. They told me they hadn't planned for it to happen this way. That they didn't mean to hurt me. That things just developed. That I was strong and would understand eventually. Eventually. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned afterward. I don't remember everything I said, only the way my body felt like it was vibrating with rage and grief and disbelief all at once. I remember asking how they could do this to me, asking what I'd done wrong, asking if any of it had been real. He looked at the floor. My best friend went quiet. That was my answer. They left together that night, took their bags, took their silence, took pieces of me I didn't know how to replace. After the door closed, the apartment felt enormous and empty. I slid down against the wall and sat there until the sun came up, staring at nothing, replaying every moment I'd trusted them, every time I'd defended them in my own mind, every red flag I'd painted over with love. The days that followed blurred into each other. I stopped answering calls, stopped going out, stopped eating properly. I lay in bed scrolling through old photos like they belonged to someone else's life. Someone naive, someone stupid. I questioned everything. My judgment, my worth, my sexuality. I wondered if loving men meant accepting pain as part of the deal. If being open meant being foolish. If my kindness had been mistaken for weakness because maybe, deep down, it was. I replayed conversations, looking for the moment I should have seen it coming. I wondered if I was too much, or not enough, too trusting, too desperate to be loved. The betrayal didn't just break my heart. It rewrote the way I saw myself. Some nights, the loneliness felt so heavy I couldn't breathe. Other nights, anger kept me awake, sharp and unforgiving. I imagined confronting them again, saying the perfect words, reclaiming my dignity. Then I imagined never seeing them again and felt the same ache either way. But somewhere in the quiet, something unexpected began to form. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was clarity. I started seeing the pattern not as proof of my failure, but of their choices. I started understanding that my ability to love deeply wasn't a flaw. That trust, when given honestly, isn't something to be ashamed of even when it's betrayed. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, a man reduced by the cruelty of two people he loved. And something inside me snapped. Not in despair, but in resolve. I realized I didn't want revenge fueled by anger. I wanted justice fueled by self-respect. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to rebuild myself so completely that they became irrelevant. I got out of bed. I cleaned the apartment. I opened my laptop and started gathering facts instead of memories. Transactions instead of texts. Evidence instead of excuses. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt steady. They thought breaking me was the end of my story. But it was only the beginning. I didn't rush into revenge. I didn't post anything dramatic or confront anyone publicly in a moment of rage. I waited. I let the anger settle into something sharper and more focused. I learned very quickly that silence, when used right, can be louder than shouting. I gathered everything. Bank records, messages, timelines, proof of how my trust had been used and how my money had been moved without full disclosure. I spoke to a legal advisor, not because I wanted to ruin their lives, but because I refused to let my own be treated carelessly. When I finally acted, it was calm, deliberate, and impossible to deny. The truth has a way of surfacing when it's presented without emotion. People who had believed their version of events started asking questions. Stories stopped lining up. The charm they relied on began to crack under simple facts. I didn't have to exaggerate or explain myself endlessly. I just told the truth and let it stand. The financial damage was reversed piece by piece. Accounts were settled. Agreements were enforced. What I'd given freely out of love, I reclaimed out of self-respect. Each step felt less like revenge and more like coming home to myself. With every document signed, I felt lighter, stronger, more grounded. They didn't handle the consequences well. I heard about it through others, not because I went looking, but because people talk when illusions fall apart. Their relationship didn't survive the pressure. Without me to anchor them, to support them, to smooth things over, the cracks widened. Trust issues turned inward. Accusations replaced affection. What they'd built on betrayal collapsed under its own weight. For the first time, I felt no satisfaction in their regret, only distance. And that distance was freedom. Healing didn't happen overnight. I started therapy, sitting across from someone who asked questions I'd avoided asking myself. Why I gave so much. Why I ignored my needs. Why I equated love with endurance. Those sessions were uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but they were honest. And honesty, I learned, is where healing begins. I rebuilt slowly. I went back to the things that made me feel like me before everything became about someone else. Morning walks, cooking meals just because I wanted to, laughing with people who didn't need anything from me. Confidence didn't return in a dramatic moment. It grew quietly, day by day. I wasn't looking for love when I met him. That was the difference. He came into my life without urgency, without pressure. Gentle, steady, emotionally present in a way that felt almost unfamiliar at first. He listened without waiting for his turn to speak. He respected boundaries without questioning them. When he said he cared, his actions didn't contradict his words. We took our time. No rushing. No secrets disguised as privacy. We talked about fears openly, about expectations, about what we wanted and what we couldn't give. Being with him felt safe, not because he promised forever, but because he showed consistency. The love that grew between us didn't burn fast or loudly. It warmed. It stayed. It didn't ask me to shrink or sacrifice my self-worth to keep it alive. For the first time, love felt like a partnership instead of a performance. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to losing myself completely. How easily bitterness could have replaced hope. But standing where I am now, I understand something I didn't back then. Betrayal doesn't define you. What you choose to become after it does. I didn't just survive betrayal, I learned how real love is supposed to feel.